My name is Caroline and I am 32 years old. I still remember the moment when my future mother-in-law slid that thick manila envelope across the mahogany table toward me, her diamond rings catching the light as she smiled with barely concealed contempt. "Just a formality, dear," she said, though her tone suggested anything but. "We need to protect what belongs to the Morrison family." What she didn't know was that I had my own secrets, my own assets, and my own lawyer who was about to turn their entire world upside down. If you've ever been underestimated by people who thought they were better than you, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button, and stay for a story about the day I taught my fiancé's family that assumptions can be very, very expensive. Growing up as Caroline Mitchell was an exercise in invisibility. My parents were loving, but financially struggling. Dad worked double shifts as a mechanic, while Mom cleaned houses during the day and waited tables at night. We lived in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in Newark, New Jersey, where the walls were thin and the winters were brutal. But despite our circumstances, my parents instilled in me something that money couldn't buy, a fierce work ethic and an unshakable belief that I could create my own future. School became my escape and my obsession. While other kids were hanging out at the mall or going to parties, I was in the library studying or working one of my 3 part-time jobs. By 16, I was tutoring math and science, waiting tables on weekends, and doing data entry from home late into the night. My guidance counselor, Mrs. Chin, was the first person outside my family to see potential in me. "Caroline," she said during my junior year, "you have a gift for numbers. Have you considered studying finance?" I hadn't, actually. Finance seemed like something for people who came from money, who had connections and country club memberships. People like the kids at school who drove BMWs their parents bought them and talked casually about their family stock portfolios. But Mrs. Chin persisted. She helped me apply for scholarships, coached me through SAT prep, and connected me with a mentor at a local investment firm. That mentor, David Rothstein, changed my life. He taught me not just about stocks and bonds, but about how wealth was created, preserved, and grown. More importantly, he taught me that coming from nothing could be an advantage. "You're hungry," he told me. "You understand the value of $1 in a way people born rich never will. That makes you dangerous in the best possible way." I graduated high school with a full scholarship to Rutgers University. For years later, I had a finance degree, 2 internships at major investment banks, and job offers from 3 different firms. I chose Caldwell and Associates, a missized but prestigious wealth management company in Manhattan. The starting salary of $85,000 felt like a fortune to someone who had grown up watching her parents count pennies. But I didn't let it go to my head. I lived in a tiny studio in Queens, bought my clothes from discount stores, and saved aggressively. More importantly, I invested. Everything David had taught me about building wealth, I applied to my own life. I started with index funds, then gradually moved into individual stocks, real estate investment trusts, and eventually cryptocurrency before it became mainstream. By age 25, my investment portfolio had grown to $200,000. By 28, it was over $500,000. I kept this information to myself. My modest lifestyle and unremarkable appearance meant that people constantly underestimated me, and I had learned that being underestimated was a powerful advantage. I dressed conservatively, drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic, and never discussed my finances with anyone except my accountant and financial advisor. To the outside world, I was just another millennial struggling to make it in expensive New York City. The truth was very different. That's the version of myself I was when I met Marcus Morrison at a charity fundraiser 3 years ago. I had been invited by a colleague and almost didn't go, but something told me I should. Marcus was there with his family, the Morrisons, one of New York's old money families with a real estate empire spanning 3 generations. He was charming, genuinely kind, and seemed refreshingly down-to-earth despite his privileged background. We talked for hours that night about everything except money. He loved literature and photography. I loved hiking and cooking. We bonded over our shared love of terrible action movies and our mutual hatred of pretentious art galleries. Our relationship developed slowly. Marcus worked in the family business, but clearly felt suffocated by it. His true passion was documentary filmmaking, a career his parents viewed as little more than an expensive hobby. They think art is something you collect, not something you create, he told me during one of our early dates. I saw in him someone who, like me, was trying to define himself outside of others' expectations. For the first 6 months, Marcus kept me separate from his family. They're complicated, he would say, which I understood to mean judgmental. When he finally introduced me, the meeting went exactly as I had feared. We gathered at the Morrison family estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, a sprawling mansion that looked like it belonged in a period drama. Marcus's parents, Richard and Victoria Morrison, greeted me with the kind of polite coldness that only the very wealthy have perfected. His younger sister, Natalie, barely glanced up from her phone. Only his grandmother, Eleanor, showed me any genuine warmth. Throughout dinner, Victoria asked pointed questions about my background, my education, and my career, each inquiry designed to emphasize the gulf between my circumstances and theirs. "So your father is a mechanic?" she asked, making the word sound vaguely obscene. "How industrious." Richard was more direct. "Caldwell and Associates is a respectable firm," he acknowledged. "Though I imagine the compensation for junior associates is fairly modest." I smiled politely and said nothing, understanding that any defense would be seen as defensive, any pride as pretentious. Marcus was clearly uncomfortable, but his attempts to redirect the conversation only made things worse. By the time we left, Victoria had made it abundantly clear that I was not the kind of woman she had envisioned for her son. "She'll warm up," Marcus assured me on the drive back to the city, though his tone suggested he didn't believe it himself. Over the next 2 years, as Marcus and I grew more serious, his family's disapproval became increasingly overt. Victoria would mention other women, daughters of family friends, women with the right background and connections. Richard would make comments about the importance of marrying within one's social class, preserving family wealth, protecting legacies. But Marcus loved me, and I loved him. Despite his family's pressure, he proposed on a rainy Tuesday evening in my tiny Queens apartment, getting down on one knee surrounded by my second-hand furniture and making a beautiful speech about choosing our own path together. The ring was modest by Morrison standards, something he had saved for himself rather than using the family heirloom Victoria had been pushing. It was perfect. The trouble started immediately after we announced our engagement. Victoria called an emergency family meeting, which Marcus attended alone at my insistence. When he returned, he looked shaken. "They want us to sign a prenuptial agreement," he said quietly. I told them absolutely not, that it showed a lack of faith in our marriage, but they're insisting. They say it's standard procedure for the family, that it protects everyone. I studied his face, seeing the conflict there. "What do you want to do?" I asked. "I want to tell them to go to hell," he said vehemently. "But my trust fund, my position in the company, everything is tied to family approval. If I refuse, they'll cut me off completely." This was the moment I had been dreading. The moment when Marcus would have to choose between his family and me, between his inheritance and his independence. "Let's see the prenup first," I said calmly. "Before we make any decisions, let's see what they're actually asking for." A week later, we received the documents. 57 pages of dense legal language that essentially boiled down to this: I would have no claim to any Morrison family assets, property, or business interests. I would receive a modest monthly allowance during the marriage. In the event of divorce, I would receive $100,000 total, regardless of the length of the marriage or circumstances of the split. If we had children, I would receive child support but no additional compensation for my role as a parent. I would sign away any rights to Marcus's trust fund, inheritance, and stake in Morrison properties. Most insultingly, there was a morality clause stating that if I committed adultery or engaged in behavior deemed inappropriate by the Morrison family, I would receive nothing. Marcus was furious when we read through it together. "This is insane," he said, pacing my small living room. "They're treating you like a gold digger, like some opportunistic stranger trying to steal the family fortune. It's humiliating." I agreed it was insulting, but I also saw an opportunity. I'll sign it, I said quietly. Marcus stopped pacing and stared at me. What? No, absolutely not. We'll figure something else out. I'll talk to my father, make him understand that this is unacceptable. I shook my head. No, Marcus. I'll sign it, but on one condition. I get to have my own lawyer review it first, and I get to propose some modifications. He was skeptical, but agreed. That's when I made a call that would change everything. My lawyer was Natasha Volkov, a woman I had met through work 2 years earlier. She specialized in high-stakes negotiations and had a reputation for being absolutely ruthless when representing her clients. She was expensive, charging $800 an hour, but I could afford her. When I explained the situation, she laughed. Let me guess, she said. Rich family, old money, thinks you're after their fortune? That's about right, I confirmed. They want me to sign away any claim to family assets. And you want to sign it? She asked, surprise evident in her voice. Yes, I said. But first, I want you to draw up my own prenuptial agreement. One that reflects my actual financial situation and protects my assets. There was a pause. Caroline, I've reviewed your financial disclosures before. Your portfolio is substantial. Are you sure you want to reveal this to them? Not to them, I said. To Marcus first. He deserves to know the truth. And then we'll let his family discover it when they think they're backing me into a corner. The meeting was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon at the Morrison estate. Victoria had insisted on handling everything there, on her turf, surrounded by the visible evidence of Morrison wealth and power. She wanted me intimidated, compliant, grateful. Marcus and I arrived together, and he squeezed my hand as we walked up to the house. You don't have to do this, he whispered. We can leave right now. I know, I replied, but I want to see this through. We were shown into Richard's study, a room designed to impress with its leather-bound books, expensive artwork, and massive desk. Richard and Victoria were already seated, along with Harrison Blackwell, the Morrison family attorney, who had brought several leather folders full of documents. Caroline, Victoria began, her smile not reaching her eyes. Thank you for being reasonable about this. I know these conversations can be uncomfortable, but they're necessary for everyone's protection. Of course, I said pleasantly, taking the seat across from her. I understand completely. Harrison opened one of his folders and began walking through the prenuptial agreement, explaining each section in the patronizing tone of someone addressing a child. Marcus sat beside me, growing increasingly angry as the terms were laid out in detail. When Harrison finished, Victoria leaned forward. Do you have any questions, dear? Just one, I said. When do I get to present my prenuptial agreement? The room went silent. Richard frowned. I'm sorry, your what? My prenuptial agreement, I repeated calmly. The one my attorney prepared. I assumed this would be a negotiation, not a dictation. Victoria's smile became fixed. I don't think you understand, Caroline. This isn't a negotiation. These are the terms under which we're willing to welcome you into the Morrison family. I see, I said. I pulled out my phone and sent a text. 30 seconds later, the doorbell rang. Victoria looked annoyed. We're in the middle of a private meeting. Who could that possibly be? The housekeeper appeared at the door. I'm sorry, Mrs. Morrison, but there's a woman here who says she has an appointment with Miss Mitchell. That would be my attorney, I said, standing. I hope you don't mind, but I thought it was only fair that if you had legal representation, I should too. Natasha Volkov swept into the room like a force of nature. She was impeccably dressed, carrying a designer briefcase and radiating the kind of confidence that comes from winning more battles than you've lost. Good afternoon, she said, not waiting for an invitation to sit. I'm Natasha Volkov, representing Miss Mitchell. I understand we're here to discuss prenuptial agreements. Victoria looked like she had swallowed something sour. This is highly irregular. We've already prepared an agreement. All Caroline needs to do is sign it. But that's where you're mistaken, Natasha said smoothly. Miss Mitchell is prepared to sign a prenuptial agreement, but only one that fairly represents both parties' assets and interests. Shall we begin? She opened her briefcase and pulled out a document that was noticeably thicker than the Morrison family's prenup. This is Miss Mitchell's financial disclosure and proposed prenuptial agreement, Natasha continued. I think you'll find it quite interesting. She slid copies across the desk to Richard, Victoria, and Harrison. I watched their faces as they began reading. First, there was confusion, then disbelief, then shock. "This can't be right," Richard said finally, looking up at me. "This says your net worth is over $1.8 million. $1.9 million as of last week," I corrected gently. "The market's been favorable." Victoria's face had gone pale. "How is this possible? You're a junior associate at a wealth management firm. Your salary can't be more than what, 90, maybe 100,000. "Actually, I'm a senior vice president now," I said. "As of 6 months ago. My salary is $240,000 annually, but most of my wealth comes from investments I've been making since college. I'm quite good with money, you see. It's literally my job." Marcus was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I reached for his hand. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner," I said quietly. "I learned a long time ago that when people know you have money, they treat you differently. I wanted you to love me for who I am, not what I have." His face softened, and he squeezed my hand back. "I love you regardless of your bank account," he said. "Though I'm wondering what else I don't know about you." "Well," I said with a small smile, "I also own 3 rental properties in Queens and a small commercial space in Brooklyn. They generate about $85,000 in passive income annually." Harrison was flipping through the pages, his professional composure finally cracking. "This is quite thorough," he admitted, "and verified by a CPA and independent auditor. Miss Mitchell, I have to say, this is highly unusual." "What's unusual?" Natasha interjected. "Is your clients assuming they're the only ones with assets worth protecting? Now, shall we discuss the actual terms of a fair prenuptial agreement?" Victoria looked like she was having difficulty breathing. "I don't understand. You dress like, you drive that old car, your apartment is rent-controlled and a fantastic investment," I finished. "Mrs. Morrison, I grew up poor. I learned early that displaying wealth is very different from building it. I chose to build it." "Let's review Miss Mitchell's proposed prenup," Natasha said, taking control of the meeting. "First, all assets and properties acquired before the marriage remain separate property. This applies to both parties equally. Miss Mitchell keeps her portfolio, investments, and properties. Marcus keeps his trust fund and family business interests." She paused to let that sink in. "Second, any assets acquired during the marriage are considered marital property to be divided equitably in the event of divorce. This is standard in New York state law, and Miss Mitchell sees no reason to deviate from it. Third, Miss Mitchell proposes that she will sign a document waiving any claim to Morrison family assets, including the business and family properties, in exchange for Marcus signing a similar document regarding her investment portfolio and rental properties. Each spouse protects what they brought to the marriage while sharing what they build together. Fourth, in the event of children, both parents will contribute proportionally to child-rearing costs based on their respective incomes and assets. No spouse will be penalized financially for taking time away from their career to raise children." Harrison was nodding slowly, his legal mind recognizing the fairness of the proposal. But Victoria was not ready to concede. "This is absurd," she said, her voice shaking with barely controlled anger. "We invited you here to sign our agreement, not to present your own demands. You're still a nobody from Newark trying to marry into our family." I felt Marcus tense beside me, but I placed a calming hand on his arm. I had expected this reaction. "Mrs. Morrison," I said calmly, "I understand this is surprising. But I'm not trying to marry into your family for money. I don't need your money. I'm marrying Marcus because I love him. What I need is respect and equal treatment, both of which your prenup failed to provide. The morality clause in your agreement, for example," Natasha added, "it only applied to Miss Mitchell, not to Marcus. It assumed she would be the one to stray, the one to behave inappropriately. That's not only insulting but also legally questionable." Richard had been quiet throughout this exchange, studying the documents. Now he looked up at me with something approaching respect. "Where did you learn to invest like this?" he asked. "I had a mentor," I replied. "And I worked hard. Very hard. While your son was attending prep school and Ivy League universities paid for by family money, I was working 3 jobs and studying every free moment I had. I'm not ashamed of my background, Mr. Morrison. I'm proud of it. It made me who I am. There was a long silence. Finally, Richard looked at his wife. Victoria, I think we need to discuss this privately. He turned to Harrison. Can you give us a moment? Harrison, Natasha, Marcus, and I stepped out into the hallway. Marcus pulled me aside, his expression a mixture of awe and hurt. Why didn't you tell me? He asked quietly. About the money, the investments, all of it? Would you have believed me? I countered. If I had told you on our first date that I was worth nearly $2 million while living in a tiny Queens apartment and driving a beat-up Honda, would you have thought I was telling the truth or making up a fantasy? He considered this. Probably the latter, he admitted. But later, after we got serious, you could have told him. Then. I planned to, I said. After we were engaged, I was going to explain everything. But then your family demanded this prenup meeting, and I realized I had an opportunity to make a point. Your parents have been treating me like a gold digger for 2 years, Marcus. They've been dismissive, condescending, and insulting. I wanted them to understand that they were wrong, that their assumptions were not only offensive but completely unfounded. You could have just told them, he said. Would they have believed me? Or would they have thought I was lying, exaggerating, or that you had given me the money? I asked. This way, with documentation and legal verification, they can't deny reality. Before he could respond, the study door opened, and Richard gestured for us to return. When we were all seated again, Victoria looked like she had been crying, though she was fighting to maintain her composure. Richard cleared his throat. We've reviewed your proposal, he began. And we're prepared to accept it with some modifications. Natasha leaned forward. What modifications? We would like Marcus to maintain his position in Morrison Properties and his voting rights in family business decisions, Richard said. We're not trying to control his personal life, but the business has been in our family for 3 generations. We need assurance that it will remain so. That's reasonable, I said before Natasha could respond. I have no interest in Morrison Properties or family business decisions. My career is in wealth management, not real estate. There's one more thing, Victoria said, her voice tight. We'd like a clause stating that any children from the marriage will carry the Morrison name and be raised with an understanding of their family heritage. Marcus bristled at this. Mom, that's not your decision to make. That's between Caroline and me. It's fine, I said, surprising everyone. I agree to that, with one addition. Any children will also be taught the value of hard work, financial responsibility, and the understanding that privilege comes with responsibility. They will not grow up thinking money is something they're simply entitled to. I looked directly at Victoria. I grew up poor, Mrs. Morrison. I know what it's like to struggle. I also know what it's like to build something from nothing through hard work and smart decisions. Those are values I want to pass on to my children, along with whatever advantages their father's family can provide. For the first time since I had met her, Victoria looked at me with something other than contempt. It wasn't quite respect, not yet, but it was a beginning. Fair enough, Richard said. He looked at Harrison. Can you incorporate these modifications? Harrison nodded. I'll need a few days to draft a revised agreement, but yes, this is all workable. Then I believe we have a deal, Natasha said, standing and extending her hand to Harrison. I'll expect the revised prenup by Thursday. Miss Mitchell and I will review it, and if everything is in order, we'll all meet again to sign. As we prepared to leave, Eleanor, Marcus's grandmother, appeared in the doorway. She had been absent during the meeting, and I wondered if that had been deliberate. So, she said, her eyes twinkling with amusement, I hear there's been quite a revelation. You knew, I said suddenly, understanding her knowing looks over the past 2 years. She smiled. My dear, I made my money the same way you did, by being smart, working hard, and letting people underestimate me. I recognized a kindred spirit the moment we met. She approached me and took my hands in hers. Welcome to the family, Caroline. You're going to do just fine. The drive back to the city was quiet at first. Marcus was processing everything that had happened, and I was exhausted from the emotional intensity of the confrontation. Finally, he spoke. I'm sorry, he said. For my family, for how they treated you, for not standing up to them more forcefully. You stood up to them when it mattered, I replied. You proposed to me despite their disapproval. You were ready to sign away your inheritance to be with me. But you shouldn't have had to go through this, he insisted. You shouldn't have had to prove your worth to people who should have just trusted my judgment. Maybe not, I agreed. But in a way, I'm glad it happened. Your parents needed to confront their assumptions and prejudices. And, honestly, it felt good to prove them wrong. He smiled at that. My girlfriend, the secret millionaire. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. Soon-to-be wife, I corrected. And I'm not that secret about it anymore. True, he laughed. What are you going to do with all that money anyway? The same thing I've been doing, I said. Investing it, growing it, and building security for our future. Although, I added with a mischievous smile, I might upgrade from the Honda Civic. Maybe something from this decade. The new prenuptial agreement was signed 3 weeks later in a much less dramatic meeting. Both sets of lawyers had worked out the final details, and the document was fair, thorough, and respectful to both parties. My parents came to the signing, and watching my father, in his worn work clothes, shake hands with Richard Morrison was a moment I'll never forget. You raised a remarkable daughter, Richard said to my dad, and for once, his tone held no condescension. We worked hard to give her opportunities we never had, my father replied simply. She did the rest herself. The wedding took place 6 months later. It was smaller than the Morrisons had initially wanted, but Marcus and I insisted on something intimate. The guest list included my parents, their friends from the neighborhood, my former mentor David Rothstein, and, of course, Eleanor, who gave a speech about the importance of marrying someone who challenges you to be better. Even Victoria seemed to have softened slightly. She still struggled with the reality of her son marrying someone she had so thoroughly misjudged, but she was trying. During the reception, she pulled me aside. I owe you an apology, she said stiffly. I made assumptions about you based on your background, and I was wrong. You're not what I expected, and I'm still adjusting to that, but I want you to know that I'm trying. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was genuine, and I accepted it. I appreciate that, Victoria, I said. I know this hasn't been easy for you. No, it hasn't, she admitted. But Eleanor reminded me that the Morrison family wasn't always wealthy. My husband's great-grandfather was an Irish immigrant who worked construction. Every family starts somewhere. And every generation has to prove itself, I added. Exactly, she said, and for the first time, we smiled at each other without any underlying tension. 2 years have passed since that dramatic prenup meeting in the Morrison study. Marcus and I are now living in a brownstone in Brooklyn that we purchased together, a compromise between my practical financial planning and his desire to establish our own space separate from family properties. I'm still at Caldwell and Associates, now managing a portfolio worth over $500 million for high-net-worth clients. Marcus left Morrison Properties last year to pursue his documentary filmmaking full-time, a decision his parents struggled with but ultimately supported. His first film, a documentary about economic inequality in New York, was recently accepted to Sundance. My relationship with the Morrison family has evolved into something resembling mutual respect. Richard occasionally asks for my investment advice, which I find somewhat amusing given how they initially viewed my financial expertise. Victoria and I will never be close, but we're civil, and she's stopped making pointed comments about my background. Eleanor and I have lunch once a month, during which she shares stories about her own journey from poverty to wealth and offers wisdom about navigating family dynamics. Perhaps the biggest change has been in my own perspective. For years, I hid my success because I feared how people would treat me if they knew the truth. The prenup situation forced me to be honest about my accomplishments, not just with Marcus's family, but with myself. I'm no longer ashamed of my success or apologetic about my ambition. I've also learned that sometimes the best way to fight prejudice is not with anger, but with evidence. The Morrisons made assumptions based on my clothes, my car, and my zip code. They learned the hard way that appearances can be deceiving and that class prejudice often says more about the person making the judgment than the person being judged. As for the prenup itself, it sits in a safety deposit box, hopefully never to be needed. But it serves as a reminder of an important truth. Respect and equality in a relationship aren't just about love, they're about recognition. Recognition that both partners bring value to the marriage, whether that value comes in the form of money, work, emotional support, or all of the above. The prenup battle wasn't really about protecting assets. It was about demanding to be seen as an equal, to be valued not for my last name or my family connections, but for who I am and what I've built through my own efforts. Last month, I found out I'm pregnant. When we shared the news with Marcus's parents, Victoria actually cried tears of joy. "Have you thought about names?" she asked, her hand on my still flat stomach. "We're considering Mitchell as a middle name," Marcus said, looking at me with love. "To honor Caroline's family and everything she's overcome." Richard nodded approvingly. "A child with both Morrison and Mitchell blood. The best of both worlds." I thought about that phrase. The best of both worlds. Old money and new. Privilege and hard work. Inherited advantage and earned success. Maybe that's what the next generation needs, an understanding that wealth isn't just about what you inherit, but what you build, that privilege comes with responsibility, and that the measure of a person isn't their bank account, but what they do with whatever resources they have. The baby room we're preparing isn't in the Morrison mansion or a penthouse apartment. It's in our modest Brooklyn brownstone, decorated with furniture we picked out together from a mix of antique shops and practical retailers. On one wall, we've hung a photo of my grandfather, the mechanic, beside a portrait of Marcus's great-great-grandfather, the Irish immigrant. Two men who never met but who would have understood each other. Both knew what it meant to work hard and dream of better for the generations to come. Sometimes Marcus asks me if I regret how everything unfolded, if I wish I had been more upfront about my finances from the beginning. The answer is complicated. Part of me wishes I could have avoided the drama and the confrontation. But another part recognizes that the prenup battle was necessary, not just for me but for Marcus and his family. It forced all of us to confront uncomfortable truths and to rebuild our relationships on a foundation of honesty and respect rather than assumptions and appearances. And if I'm being completely honest, there was something satisfying about watching Richard and Victoria's faces when they realized they had completely misjudged me. Not because I wanted revenge or to humiliate them, but because I wanted them to understand a fundamental truth. You cannot judge a person's worth by their clothing, their car, or their zip code. Success comes in many forms, and sometimes the most impressive achievements are the ones people work hardest to hide. My advice to anyone facing a similar situation is this: know your worth, both literally and figuratively. Don't let others' assumptions define you or limit you. If someone tries to force you into a corner or make you accept less than you deserve, stand up for yourself. Bring your lawyer, bring your receipts, and bring your confidence. And remember that the best revenge against people who underestimate you isn't anger or aggression. It's success, documented and undeniable. As for me, I'm still driving that old Honda Civic. Not because I have to, but because it reminds me of where I came from and how far I've traveled. Although I did recently buy a second car, a sensible SUV for when the baby comes. Marcus teases me about my practicality, but he also loves me for it. He loves that I use coupons at the grocery store even though we could afford not to. He loves that I comparison shop and negotiate prices and track every investment. He loves me not despite these things, but because of them. And I love him for seeing past the surface, for choosing me over his family's approval, for building a life with me that honors both our backgrounds while creating something uniquely ours. The prenup that was supposed to drive us apart ultimately brought us closer together. It forced us to be honest with each other about everything: money, values, expectations, and fears. Have you ever been underestimated because of your background or appearance? Have you had to prove yourself to people who made unfair assumptions about you? Share your experiences in the comments below, and let me know if you think prenups are about protecting assets or testing relationships. Don't forget to like and subscribe if this story resonated with you. Remember, your worth isn't determined by others' opinions. It's determined by your actions, your choices, and your willingness to stand up for yourself when it matters most. Sometimes the best way to win is to quietly prove everyone wrong. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you navigate your own challenges with confidence and grace.